Imagine the sensation of air so cold it actually hurts to breathe, a dry, sharp needle prick in the back of your throat with every gasp. Your skin is pulled tight against your cheekbones, and the smell of wood smoke is the only thing anchoring you to the idea of safety. You are sitting just inside the circle of light cast by a dying fire, and beyond that light, the world is a wall of absolute, freezing blackness. Then you hear it. It isn't a growl, and it isn't a howl. It is the sound of heavy paws crunching on frozen crust, a rhythmic, deliberate pressure that tells you something large is circling your camp. You feel a prickle of sweat on your neck despite the sub-zero temperature. Why did that creature, the most successful apex predator of the Pleistocene, decide to stop hunting you and start watching you? Why did the wolf, out of all the monsters in the dark, choose to walk toward the fire instead of waiting for it to go out? And perhaps most importantly, what did they see in us that made them willing to gamble their entire biological future on a species that was, by all accounts, much weaker than they were? To answer that, we have to ask a different question first. Why does the most popular story we tell ourselves about dogs, the one where a brave hunter steals a wolf pup and raises it to be a loyal companion, fall apart the moment you look at the actual science? It is a beautiful image, the idea of a prehistoric human reaching into a den and sparking a friendship, but biology suggests that is almost certainly a fairy tale. If you take a wolf pup today and try to raise it like a golden retriever, you will quickly find that by the time it reaches 6 weeks of age, its predatory instincts are hardwired and its fear of humans is an ancestral wall you cannot climb. So, if we didn't kidnap them and force them to love us, how did the first interaction actually begin? And as a quick aside, the stolen pup theory ignores the fact that a wild wolf mother would likely have turned that brave hunter into a pile of bones long before he reached the den. The reality is much stranger and far more calculated. It wasn't a human choice, it was a wolf's decision. What made a wolf realize that a human camp was more than just a source of potential prey? Around 30,000 years ago, the Northern Hemisphere was a brutal landscape where every single calorie was paid for in blood. Wolves were the undisputed masters of this world, capable of taking down mammoths and bison, but that mastery came with a staggering injury rate. A single kick from an elk could end a wolf's life. Into this high-stakes environment stepped humans, who were, frankly, quite messy. We were resource-rich in a way no other animal was. We killed large prey, but because we lacked the massive digestive systems of carnivores, we left behind a wealth of scraps, bones with marrow, fatty offal, and lean meat that we simply couldn't finish before it spoiled. For a wolf on the brink of starvation, those scraps weren't just trash, they were a low-risk, high-reward buffet. But this leads to another mystery. How did these scavengers move from the trash heaps into our actual lives? If you were a wolf scavenging at the edge of a human camp, what was the one trait that determined whether you lived or died? The answer is something biologists call flight distance. It is the invisible bubble of space an animal maintains between itself and a perceived threat. In the wild, a wolf with a large flight distance survives because it runs away at the first sign of trouble. But near a human camp, a large flight distance means you never get close enough to the fire to get the best scraps. The brave wolves, the ones with a naturally smaller flight distance, were the ones who got the calories. They were the ones who survived the winter, and they were the ones who passed their calm genes onto their pups. But did these wolves know they were changing their own biology just by hanging around? Interestingly, this process of self-domestication is the same thing that likely happened to the first cats in the Near East thousands of years later. Over generations, this selection for tameness didn't just change their behavior, it triggered a cascade of physical changes that scientists call domestication syndrome. Why does selecting for a calm brain suddenly result in floppy ears, curly tails, and white patches on a wolf's chest? This is one of the most counterintuitive wow facts in evolutionary biology. In 1959, a Soviet scientist named Dmitry Belyaev decided to test this by breeding silver foxes solely for tameness. He didn't pick the ones with the prettiest fur or the best health. He only picked the ones that didn't try to bite his hand. Within just a few generations, these foxes started to look like dogs. Their ears flopped, their muzzles shortened, and they even started barking. It turns out that the stem cells responsible for the adrenal system, the part of the brain that controls the fight or flight response, are the same cells that dictate where pigment goes on the skin and how cartilage forms in the ears. By choosing calm, you are accidentally choosing cute. The wolves that chose to live near humans were literally evolving into something less threatening just so they could stay close to the food. But as they became more dog-like, did they start to offer us something in return, or were they just the world's most successful freeloaders? Could the presence of these proto-dogs be the secret reason why modern humans are still here, while our cousins, the Neanderthals, vanished? This is a question that anthropologist Pat Shipman explored in her research, and her conclusion is haunting. Neanderthals were stronger, more heavily muscled, and better adapted to the cold than we were. They had been the dominant predators in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. But when modern humans arrived, we brought a secret weapon, the wolf. Shipman argues that the alliance between humans and wolves created a superpredator that was more efficient than anything the world had ever seen. A human can see long distances in daylight and throw a spear with deadly precision, but we are terrible at tracking scent and we can't see worth a damn in the dark. Wolves, on the other hand, are sensory masters who can find prey miles away but struggle to kill large animals without risking their lives. When we teamed up, the math of the hunt changed. Just as a quick thought, imagine being a Neanderthal hunting alone and realizing your competition now has a four-legged radar system that never sleeps. We weren't just sharing food, we were sharing our very survival. Does this mean the wolves were actually the ones who drove the Neanderthals to extinction? The evidence found at sites across Europe suggests that where humans and wolf dogs live together, mammoth kills skyrocketed. At sites like Předmostí in the Czech Republic, researchers found the remains of over 1,000 mammoths. It is almost impossible for a small group of humans to kill and process that much meat alone. But with a pack of semi-domesticated wolves to help corner the prey and then guard the carcass from other scavengers, it becomes a biological certainty. The wolves provided the tracking and the defense, we provided the kill. This partnership gave us a caloric surplus that allowed our populations to explode while the Neanderthals, hunting in small, isolated groups, simply couldn't compete. But if this was just a business transaction based on hunting, why did we start burying them with the same honors we gave our own children? Why would a 14,000-year-old human tribe in Bonn-Oberkassel, Germany, take the time to bury a young dog alongside a man and a woman, and even place its head near the woman's hand? This isn't just utility. This is something much deeper. When researchers analyzed the bones of that specific dog, they found something heartbreaking. The animal had suffered from canine distemper as a pup. It was severely ill for months and would have been completely unable to hunt or even move on its own. The only way that dog survived to adulthood was if the humans in that tribe spent weeks hand-feeding it, cleaning it, and protecting it. They didn't keep it because it was useful, they kept it because they loved it. But how do you get a predator to trigger a love response in a different species? By the way, this is the exact moment the wolf ceased to be a tool and became a family member. The answer lies in a biological hack that the wolves unknowingly developed over thousands of years of staring at us. Is it possible for two different species to actually synchronize their brains just by looking at each other? Research led by Takefumi Kikusui in Japan has shown that when humans and dogs make eye contact, both species experience a massive spike in oxytocin, the same love hormone that bonds a mother to her newborn baby. This doesn't happen when humans look at pet wolves, even if they've raised them from birth. Somewhere along the line, dogs evolved a specific muscle in their eyebrows, the levator anguli oculi medialis, which allows them to make puppy dog eyes. This muscle doesn't exist in wild wolves. It evolved specifically because it triggers a nurturing response in the human brain. We are biologically hardwired to want to protect things that look like human infants, and the wolves that chose us eventually evolved a face that exploited that hardware. We think we were domesticating them, but in many ways, they were training us to provide for them. They hacked our oxytocin loop and never looked back. But does that mean they lost their wolfness entirely, or did they just hide it? How much of that ancient, Ice Age predator is still hiding inside the dog sleeping on your rug? If you look at the genetic record, the separation between the ancestors of modern dogs and the wolves of today happened somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago. That is a massive window of time. It means that for thousands of years, there were animals living among us that weren't quite wolves anymore, but weren't yet the dogs we recognize. They were in a biological limbo. During this time, their brains actually shrank. As a quick aside, brain shrinkage is a hallmark of domestication across almost all species, because you no longer need the massive sensory processing power required to survive alone in the wild. Their snouts got shorter, their teeth got smaller, and their digestive systems underwent a radical transformation. A study published in Nature in 2013 revealed that dogs have significantly more copies of a gene called AMY2B, which allows them to digest starch. Wolves don't have this. This gene appeared because dogs were eating our leftovers, the roots, the tubers, and the grains that were the foundation of early human diets. They literally changed their DNA to match our trash. But if they were changing to fit our world, were we also changing to fit theirs? There is a theory in evolutionary biology called gene culture coevolution, and it suggests that our relationship with wolves didn't just change our hunting habits, it changed our very nature. Think about our sense of security. Before wolves, a human sleeping in the wild was a target. Every snap of a twig could be a cave lion or a rival tribe. But with wolves at the perimeter, our ancestors could afford to sleep more deeply. This reduction in hypervigilance may have allowed our own brains to develop in different directions, focusing more on social complexity and language rather than raw survival. We became human partly because we outsourced our security to another species. We stopped being the animal that had to watch the dark, because we had an ally that could see the dark for us. But what happens when that ally is no longer needed for survival? Why do we still feel such a profound, almost spiritual connection to these animals today, long after we stopped needing them to hunt mammoths or guard our caves? Interestingly, some psychologists believe our dog obsession is actually a form of ancestral nostalgia coded into our nervous systems. We see it in the way dogs are used in modern therapy, the way they can sense a seizure before it happens, or the way they can track a missing person across miles of forest. They are still doing the job they signed up for 30,000 years ago. The job is just shaped differently now. They provide a bridge to a version of ourselves that was more connected to the natural world. When you sit with a dog, you are sitting with a living fossil of the Ice Age, a creature that made a calculated bet on a strange, fire-wielding primate and won. They chose us when we were at our most vulnerable, and in doing so, they ensured that neither of us would ever have to face the dark alone again. Here is the part of the story that most people tend to overlook. The wolves that chose us didn't just survive, they conquered the planet alongside us. Today, there are roughly 300,000 wild wolves left on Earth. Compare that to the estimated 1 billion dogs. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, the decision to walk toward the fire was the most successful move any predator has ever made in the history of life. They traded their freedom for a place by the hearth, and in return, they gained the world. But that trade came with a cost. The wolf lost its independence, its fierce autonomy, and its place as the ghost of the forest. It became something else, a reflection of us. We have shaped them into 1,000 different forms, from the Great Dane to the Chihuahua, sometimes to the point of causing them physical suffering just to satisfy our aesthetic whims. We took a magnificent killer and turned it into a companion that mirrors our own flaws. Does that mean we won the negotiation? Or did the wolf simply find a more efficient way to exist? Think about the good boy sleeping on your couch right now. He doesn't have to hunt. He doesn't have to worry about the freezing wind or the competition of a cave lion. He has successfully manipulated one of the most dangerous species on the planet into providing him with premium food, medical care, and a temperature-controlled environment. If you look at it through that lens, it wasn't the humans who tamed the wolves, it was the wolves who domesticated the humans. They found the one creature capable of terraforming the planet and convinced that creature to become their personal provider. It is a partnership that has survived the rise and fall of every civilization in human history. Every empire, every war, and every technological revolution has happened with a dog sitting nearby, watching us with those oxytocin-filled eyes. Which brings us to the ultimate reveal, the one fact that changes how you look at every dog you pass on the street. Scientists recently began looking at the superorganism theory of human-dog evolution. They found that our heart rates actually synchronize when we are together. Our stress levels drop in a mirrored feedback loop. We aren't just two species living in the same house. We are two halves of a single, 30,000-year-old biological unit. Without the wolf, you wouldn't be the person you are today. You might not be here at all. We are the human wolf, a hybrid predator that redefined the rules of the Earth. As a quick aside, it's worth wondering if we would have ever bothered to go to the moon if we didn't have the confidence of a species that had already conquered the wilderness. We think we are the masters of our domain, but we are actually just one half of an ancient pact. When you look into your dog's eyes, you aren't just seeing a pet. You are looking at the descendant of a creature that saw your ancestors shivering in the mud, surrounded by monsters, and decided that you were worth the risk. They didn't have to choose us. They could have stayed in the shadows and waited for us to die out, just like the Neanderthals did. But they didn't. They stepped into the light. And in that moment, the history of the world shifted. It wasn't about man's best friend. It was about the two most dangerous things on the planet realizing that they were better together than they were apart. And that realization has colored every second of human history since. But before we get too comfortable with that beautiful idea, we have to face the final, cold reality of this relationship. We like to think of domestication as a story of mutual love and cooperation, a heartwarming tale of two species finding each other in the cold. But evolution doesn't care about your heart. Evolution only cares about the cold, hard numbers of survival. The truth is that the dog you love is the result of 30,000 years of brutal, systematic filtering. For every calm wolf that was allowed to stay by the fire, dozens of others were speared to death because they were too aggressive, or starved to death because they were too afraid. The loyalty we value so much isn't just a personality trait, it is a survival mechanism that was forged in the blood of the wolves that didn't make the cut. We didn't save the wolves. We harvested the ones we could use and let the rest of their kind slide toward the brink of extinction. Think about that for a second. The creature sleeping at the foot of your bed isn't there because of a choice, in the way we understand it. It is there because its ancestors were the only ones broken enough, or desperate enough, to accept a life of servitude in exchange for a full stomach. And while you feel a warm glow of affection looking at them, you are actually participating in the final stage of a 30,000-year-old conquest. We didn't just take their freedom, we took their very identity and rebuilt it in our own image. If you were to vanish tomorrow, the vast majority of the billion dogs on this planet would be dead within a month. They can no longer survive without us. We have made them entirely, dangerously dependent on our existence. Do you ever wonder if, deep down in their genetic memory, they remember what it was like to be the ghost in the dark? Do you think they ever regret the day they walked toward the fire? Probably not. The oxytocin is too strong for that. But you should remember it. Because the fact is, the only reason you are sitting in a warm room today at the top of the global food chain is because a desperate scavenger once decided that your trash was worth more than its dignity. You didn't earn your place at the top of the world. You outsourced the hard work to a predator that you eventually taught to fetch your slippers. Every time you look at a dog, you are looking at the price of your own survival. And the cold, undeniable fact is this: you belong to them just as much as they belong to you, because without that ancient, calculated betrayal of their own kind, your branch of the human family tree would have been pruned into oblivion tens of thousands of years ago. You aren't the master of the dog. You are the lucky survivor of a pact you didn't even know you made. If the wolves hadn't chosen us, the world would be full of Neanderthals, and you wouldn't even be a memory. This relationship wasn't built on a foundation of kindness, but on a foundation of cold, calculated necessity. We needed their senses, they needed our scraps. We needed their protection, they needed our fire. It was a transaction of blood and bone that happened in the coldest corners of the prehistoric world. We should be careful not to mistake that for something purely sentimental. The dog is a biological technology, a living tool that we have refined over hundreds of centuries to be the perfect interface between the human world and the wild world. And while we've changed them physically, they have changed us psychologically. They are the mirror we use to see ourselves. So, the next time you hear a dog bark in the middle of the night, don't just think of it as an annoyance. Think of it as the sound of a 30,000-year-old alarm system that is still functioning perfectly. That sound is the reason your ancestors survived the night. It is the reason the lions and the bears stayed away. It is the sound of the pact. We are the only species on this planet that has a permanent, biological alliance with another apex predator. That alliance is our greatest strength, but it is also a reminder of how close we came to losing everything. We aren't the kings of nature. We are just the primates who were smart enough to hire a bodyguard. If you found this deep dive into our ancient alliance fascinating, consider joining our pack by subscribing. We're constantly investigating these hidden threads of history and biology that made us who we are. But before you go, I have a question for you. If you were back in that Ice Age camp, and a wolf walked out of the darkness toward your fire, would you have been the person to throw it a bone, or the person to reach for a spear? Your answer might say more about your own evolution than you think. Let us know in the comments. After all, the fire is still burning, and the dark is still full of things we don't fully understand. We'll see you in the next one.